Somebody paid $40 last month for a PDF that promised the exact qualification criteria for a protocol which had not announced a token, had not announced a snapshot, and had not published a points formula. He forwarded it to me to ask whether it was worth anything. 14 pages of confident bullet points. Minimum transaction counts, minimum bridge volume, a magic number of active weeks per wallet. Every figure in there was invented because at the time there was nothing real to copy them from. That is the part almost nobody says out loud about this whole hobby. The criteria get written after the fact. How the criteria actually get written? A team decides to distribute. By then, the whole history is already sitting in front of them. Every wallet, every transaction, every deposit in and every withdrawal back out. Somebody on that team has to turn all of that into a list of addresses, and they do it by looking at the data and drawing lines through it. The lines land where they land partly because of what the abuse looked like on that particular chain in that particular season. That is why two protocols in the same category, launching 4 months apart, can end up with formulas that share almost nothing. I have watched a team publish a formula and then open an appeals window 3 days later because the first pass had caught people who had done nothing wrong. That is a normal outcome when you write rules against the dataset instead of against the principle, and it tells you how much of this gets settled in the final fortnight. So when a seller hands you the criteria, work out where they got them, either from a formula that has already been published, in which case it describes a distribution that is already over, or from thin air. There is no third source. Anybody selling you a guaranteed checklist is selling you a guess with better formatting. The honest position is that the formula for whatever you are farming today does not exist yet. It will exist eventually, and it will be written by somebody sitting in front of a screen looking at what you have already done. Why I think about it this way. I run mobile proxy lines and a rack of Android phones for a living. Real SIMs on real carriers, real hardware in a room that needs its own fan. That business taught me one habit that carries straight over here, which is that I price a thing before I touch it. A SIM is about $10 a month. A modem depreciates at roughly $1.50 a month across its useful life. A powered hub that carries about 30 ports costs $150. I know those numbers because if I did not know them, I would have no idea whether a line makes money or quietly loses it. Almost nobody applies that habit to airdrop farming. That is most of what is wrong with airdrop farming. What has actually tended to count? I want to be careful with the verb tended. Across the distributions that eventually published how they scored, a few patterns show up often enough to be worth planning around. None of them is a promise about the next one, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Time, not volume. The first is duration. Wallets that touched a protocol across many months have generally been treated better than wallets that did the same total number of actions inside a single week. The burst is cheap to manufacture, and everybody designing these formulas knows it. 8 months of irregular use is expensive to manufacture, because the one thing you cannot buy retroactively is having been there in March. This is also the criterion that stings most, because it means the decision that mattered got made long before you knew there was anything to decide. Money that was actually at risk. The second is size. A wallet that shuffled $5 around 40 times reads very differently to a wallet that held a $2,000 lending position open for 5 months. Dust is the cheapest signal in the world to fake, so it gets discounted the hardest. Some published formulas simply floor out below a threshold, where everything under a certain dollar amount contributes exactly zero. That does not mean you should put money you need into a protocol you have not read. It means the thing being rewarded is exposure, and exposure is the possibility of losing it. That is the actual trade, and it deserves saying plainly rather than being buried under the word farming. There is a second reason size keeps showing up. A team distributing to real users wants those users to have felt something. A wallet that never risked anything, never had any reason to care whether the product worked, how much of the thing you touched. The third is breadth inside one protocol. Bridging in, swapping, opening a lending position, borrowing against it, voting on a proposal, using more than the single cheapest action on the menu. A wallet that only ever performed the one action a guide told it to perform looks like somebody following a guide. A wallet that used 4 different parts of the product looks like somebody who found the product useful. That distinction is visible without any clever analysis at all. You can see it by eye. The fourth is whether you were still there. Plenty of formulas have carried a term for whether the position was still open at the snapshot or for what happened to tokens from a previous round. Farm and leave shows up in the data permanently. Teams that have already run one distribution do go back and read what happened to it before they design the next one. And the wallets that dumped everything inside a week are the easiest rows in the spreadsheet to find. I have seen wallets score down specifically for selling a prior round inside the first 7 days. That is a rule you can only invent after you have watched it happen to you once. What gets filtered and why honest wallets trip it? I want to handle this part carefully because there is a version of this conversation that turns into a manual for pretending to be 40 people, and that is not the version I am interested in making. What I will describe is what the clustering looks for in the third persons so that somebody running a few wallets for ordinary reasons understands why they occasionally get swept up in it. The loudest signal is timing. 12 wallets that all transact inside the same 11-minute window, week after week, are describing one operator with the script and the scheduler. Real people are irregular. They act at odd hours, they skip a week, they forget. A schedule is the single easiest thing to spot on a chart. The second is funding. If every wallet was topped up out of the same exchange withdrawal, or from one hot wallet that sprayed to all of them in a single afternoon, the funding graph is a star with a hub in the middle of it. That shape takes one graph query to find, the kind somebody writes in an afternoon. It is the first query anybody runs. The third is repetition. Same contracts, same order, same amounts, same number of steps every time. One wallet doing that is a person with a routine. 40 wallets doing it identically is one routine. And here is the obvious thing that follows. If you are running several wallets for genuinely separate reasons, the way to avoid looking like a farm is to genuinely be different, and being genuinely different is slow and expensive. The cheap imitation of difference is exactly what gets caught. The fees nobody adds up. Now the part that never appears in the PDF. Every action costs a fee. On a congested layer 1, an approval plus a swap can run a few dollars. On a cheap rollup, it might be fractions of a cent. Spread that across 8 months, across a handful of protocols, across more than one wallet, and it compounds into a real number, a number you paid whether or not anything is ever distributed to you. Add up a year of it before you call this free money. It is a subscription you pay to a chain that has no opinion about how it turns out for you. The asymmetry is the bit people skip. The fee is certain and you pay it today. The reward is contingent and it arrives, if it arrives, some unknown number of months from now. The capital nobody prices. Then the capital, holding $2,000 in a position for 5 months, is $2,000 you did not have available for 5 months. Whatever else that money might have done, it did not do. That cost is real even when the position closes at precisely the price it opened at, and I have almost never seen it appear in anybody's farming spreadsheet. The hours nobody bills, then the time, 1 hour a week for 8 months is 32 hours of your life. I'm not going to tell you what your hour is worth. I will tell you that leaving it out of the arithmetic is how farming stays profitable inside your head while losing money in reality. The distributions people talk about are famous because they were unusual, which is the same reason lottery winners get interviewed and lottery losers do not. What I got wrong. For about a year, I ran the volume theory. More wallets, more actions, more protocols, on the assumption that qualification was mostly a numbers game, and the way to win a numbers game is more numbers. I spent somewhere around $600 in fees over that stretch. I got 2 allocations out of it. One was worth less than what I had already spent on that single protocol, and the other I handled badly on the way out. Meanwhile, a wallet I had been using for months for actual reasons, my own money, no strategy attached to it at all, qualified for something several times larger than the entire fleet produced together. I do not think that was luck. One wallet had a history and 30 wallets had a pattern, and I had spent a year optimizing the wrong variable while the evidence sat in my own records. What changed afterwards was the count. 4 protocols now, and each one gets attention instead of a scripted visit. I keep a sheet with fees on one side and everything that has actually landed on the other, and I read it before I add anything new to the list. Use fewer protocols for longer with money you were already willing to expose, and stop paying anybody for criteria that do not exist yet. That makes for boring content. It is also the only version of this I can describe honestly, because the rules get written at the end and everything published before that is a guest wearing a suit. The disclaimer meant literally, none of this is financial advice, and I am not going to tell you what a token will be worth. I do not know. The people selling you a number do not know either, and the ones who sound most certain are the ones charging the most. I also cannot tell you that any protocol is safe. What I can tell you is what the finished published formulas actually weighted when the scoring was already done, and that is the only real evidence any of us have to work from. The full write-ups, the tested tooling, and the cost sheets I genuinely use are all there. Everything is at airdropfarming.org. Subscribe for more on airdrop